Tonight, Oval Office scoreboard.
Can you think of any other president that's done as much in 1 year? Name one.
All the hits and all the misses 1 year into the president's term. Plus,
the equality of the unborn child.
Tens of thousands of pro-life advocates meet in Washington for the annual March for Life, marking the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion in America. And historic levels of violent crime in Chicago. How one pastor is fighting back to break the cycle of violence.
The church is the hope of the world.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. With 1 full year under the belt, President Biden's unfinished agenda. Good evening and thanks for joining me on Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup. Well, as President Biden marks his first year in the Oval Office, no question it's included difficult challenges that continue on multiple fronts. Mr. Biden entered the White House facing an unpredictable pandemic and a deeply divided country, vowing a return to normalcy in the White House after 4 years of Donald Trump as commander-in-chief. But do Americans think he delivered? CBN's Tara Mergener is here now with both a look back and what this president faces ahead. Tara.
Well, John, that's right. And in his inaugural address, President Biden talked about how Americans prevail during struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks. But now, with 1 year in the books, the president has many setbacks of his own, including having the lowest approval rating of any president in modern history. Still, he insists he has made enormous progress.
Can you think of any other president that's done as much in 1 year? Name one for me.
I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
When Joe Biden took office, his presidency appeared to be off to a solid start, enjoying strong approval while rolling out a vaccine plan and COVID relief package without Republican support.
The rescue package put money in the pockets of the American people, vaccines in their arms, many more children safely back to school.
A $1 trillion infrastructure bill pumping federal dollars aimed at repairing roads and bridges, expanding internet access, and more. Unemployment under 4% in December, a pandemic low, even as the economy added fewer jobs than expected. He's also seen more than 40 federal judges confirmed in the Senate, the most since President Reagan. Then a summer bombshell, with the botched troop withdrawal from Afghanistan leading to criticism from both sides, and coinciding with his approval rating dropping below 50% for the first time as president. Since then, he's struggled to garner necessary support from Congress for his biggest plans, including his signature Build Back Better Act that stalled in the Senate, thanks in part to moderate Democrats balking at the cost.
I did not anticipate that there'd be such a stalwart effort to make sure that the most important thing was that President Biden didn't get anything done.
The yeas are 52, the nays are 48.
And a year-end closing shot came Wednesday, when moderate Democrats blocked an attempt to pass a far-reaching voting rights and election reform bill by changing the Senate's filibuster rules.
Eliminating the filibuster would be the easy way out. It wasn't meant to be easy.
The majority of Americans say the president isn't paying enough attention to the inflation, economy, a labor shortage,
paying people more to stay at home than to go back to work,
surging gas prices, and more.
The American people are facing an economic crisis, an energy crisis, a border crisis, an education crisis, a crime crisis, a worsening COVID-19 crisis, and a national security crisis.
Meanwhile, while he promised to get COVID under control, vaccination rates are lagging, and tests are in short supply as Omicron spreads.
And pundits say the president faces significant political headwinds ahead of next year's midterm elections, a major problem potentially, John, for Democrats as they try to keep the majority in Congress.
Big year ahead. So much. Thank you so much, Tara Mergener. Well, joining us now is Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council and host of Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. Tony, welcome back to Faith Nation. So we're talking hits and misses. From your perspective, Tony, how would you rate the president's first year in office?
John, it's been a tough year for him, but I will tell you, last night was probably the worst as the Senate made the move to try and change the filibuster rules. The fact that we've had a filibuster since the Senate came into being. And so what this did is took away a club that Chuck Schumer has been using over the last year to try to force the Republicans along with the agenda. Now, this was a major game of political chicken, and Chuck Schumer lost. He's left with just a bunch of feathers. This was a significant tactical win for Mitch McConnell, and I think it is going to have more influence and effect upon the remainder of the Biden administration than anyone really thinks.
I would tend to agree with you, and I think a lot of political observers agree as well. Tony, I know that you campaigned or you were working to re-elect Donald Trump, so this is a little bit of a tough question for you. But if forced, is there anything that you could point to as a positive?
Well, it would be really difficult because the president yesterday in his press conference said he has accomplished an enormous amount. Of course, a lot of people snickered at that, but I wasn't, because he has accomplished a lot for the far left. When you look at what he has done through the administrative state when it comes to the life issue, when it comes to religious liberty issues, he has systematically dismantled a lot of the gains that were made for pro-lifers under the Trump administration. But we have the backstop, obviously, of the Supreme Court taking the Dobbs case, a decision coming in that case where many anticipate that the issue of abortion could be sent back to the states, making America once again a predominantly pro-life nation.
Tony, I'm glad we have you on today. Speaking of religious liberty, last week President Biden issued a proclamation for Religious Freedom Day, noting that the founders enshrined the principle as a cornerstone in the Constitution. He talked about how faith played prominently personally in his own life, a beacon of hope for him and what he called a calling of purpose. He also called on all Americans to rededicate themselves to the fundamental principles of religious freedom. Tony, did he go far enough?
Well, rhetoric is one thing, and I'm grateful for proclamations, but I want to see a record established that would take that rhetoric and put it into action. And the opposite is what we see from this administration, whether it's on domestic issues or foreign policy issues. We just saw a report this week from Open Doors USA that now the #1 place where Christians are being persecuted is in Afghanistan. And the reason cannot be disconnected from the U.S. withdrawal and the way we withdrew from Afghanistan. So our policies as a nation have tremendous implications for religious freedom, not just for folks here at home, but all around the world.
That's right. Afghanistan knocking off North Korea, which has been the top spot for 20 years. Tony Perkins with the Family Research Council. We always appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Thanks, John.
Well, pro-life advocates from across America have flocked to the nation's capital ahead of tomorrow's annual March for Life. Tens of thousands are expected to attend the event on the Washington National Mall. The theme of this year's march, Equality Begins in the Womb. March for Life President Jean Mancini recently joined us on Faith Nation to explain its meaning.
Our thought going into this year is that equality and, for some, equity has been part of the public conversation to some certain rigorous degree over these past couple of years, whether it's racial injustices, whether it's even COVID, precautions and what have you. And so we wanted to take that very interesting and robust conversation, but insert into it a topic that often is not included, which is the equality of the unborn child.
The March for Life happens every year, centered on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion in America. Now, with the future of Roe again in the hands of the High Court due to an abortion case out of Mississippi, organizers say they hope this is the last march to take place under the 1973 ruling. Well, Dr. Tara Sander Lee is the Director of Life Sciences at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, a research and education nonprofit working in life-related policy and legal decisions. Tara, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's talk about that theme, Equality Begins in the Womb. Can you talk about its significance and what that means to you?
This is such an important time, and the theme is so important. Equality begins in the womb, because not only, I don't know if you've seen the recent New York Times article, but we're finding that not only are healthy babies being aborted in the womb, but babies are being discriminated against in the womb just because they have they have different genes from us. They have, such as Down syndrome. And so we are seeing that babies are being aborted at a high rate just because they look different than us, they act different than us. And so it's such an important time to have a march that focuses on the fact that we need to consider all babies to be equal, from not only inside the womb, but outside the womb as well.
You talk about discrimination, citing that reporting. I know you're committed to the cause, and I understand you've helped in cases where there's been a Down syndrome diagnosis for the unborn. Can you talk about why that's such an important fight?
It's so important because right now over a dozen states are actually over a dozen states are passing laws that are going to ban abortions based on a prenatal diagnosis or risk that the baby has disease, such as Down syndrome or a trisomy disorder, another trisomy disorder such as trisomy 13 or 18. And so what I've been testifying in different states about is that we need to support this type of legislation so that we do not abort babies inside the womb for any reason, let alone because they have a genetic disposition. So it's really important that these laws are going into effect. And it's also really important to know that a lot of these genetic screens that are occurring are often wrong. They are just screenings. They're not always diagnostic. And so a lot of babies are being aborted not just because they have a risk of this disease, but also healthy babies are being aborted because the tests are actually wrong. And so it's really important that we get that information out there. And so I've been going into the states and testifying on how inaccurate these tests can be and how wrong these abortions based on and how discriminatory they are.
Tara, we only have a few seconds left. I'd love your thoughts on this possibly being the last year the March for Life will proceed with Roe v. Wade still in place.
It is such an exciting time. We are very optimistic that the Supreme Court is going to have a favorable ruling later this year, and that this will be our last march, and that we will see a reversal of Roe in some capacity, and that these decisions will go back to the states, and that more lives will be saved.
All right, we will have to leave it there. Dr. Tara Sander Lee of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Well, for more on the March for Life, whose theme is Equality Begins in the Womb, join us tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern for live coverage. You can find that on the CBN News YouTube channel. We'll be back with more Faith Nation right after this. Well, welcome back. To the economy, another rise in the number of people seeking jobless benefits. Figures out today from the Labor Department show 286,000 new unemployment applications last week. That's the highest amount of new claims since October, up 55,000 from the week before. Altogether, about 1.6 million Americans are currently receiving unemployment benefits. Well, we're joined now by Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, welcome back. This is the third straight week we've talked about a rise in new unemployment applications. How should Americans feel about the overall health of the job market? Should they stay positive?
Well, I think there's always some virtue in remaining upbeat and optimistic. This has been a setback, and it's occurred during what is the cause of the economic severe downturn going back to early 2020, and that's the pandemic, this latest turn in the pandemic related to the Omicron variant. And I do think that it's taking a toll on the job market and causing some fresh job loss, probably some businesses either closing temporarily, we know that for a fact, or closing permanently. And that's also within the context of plenty of new business startups during this time as well. But let's remember, John, we recently got the monthly unemployment rate below 4%. It's basically close to where the Federal Reserve considers to be full employment. We were at 3.5% before the pandemic. And those new jobless claims were recently at the lowest level in 52 years. So we're coming off a low base in both measures.
Looking at things in perspective there, you did talk about the pandemic, and it really drives home the point. You never really know when an emergency could strike. Still, according to a new Bankrate survey, less than half of Americans have enough savings to cover an unplanned expense of $1,000. Mark, how concerning is that, given that I thought shortly after the pandemic, we were talking about how Americans had more savings than ever.
Well, the savings rate did spike to basically unprecedented levels because in many cases we couldn't spend our money even if we wanted to, staying at home and the like. But I appreciate you mentioning that survey, which we released this week, about emergency savings, because it finds that 44% of Americans can pay an emergency expense of $1,000 or more from savings. That might sound like bad news at some level, and it's not as high as we'd like. That means the majority cannot, right? And so the other part is that it's the highest in the 8 years that we've been doing the survey, meaning people are in a better position to pay that emergency expense now than they have been, but we need to get that higher, and that goes back to some of our mantras at Bankrate, and that is we really do need to prioritize emergency savings and our retirement savings, and we never know, as you say, when something's going to interrupt income, interrupt employment, or cause a sudden expense, and then we have to figure out how we're going to pay for that.
Mark, if we can, I want to go back to the top story of our newscast. Today marks 1 year since Joe Biden took the oath of office and became president. In the 30 seconds or so that we have left, how has the economy changed under his administration?
Well, obviously, we've seen two main dynamics that I think he had to reference in his recent news conference, and that is improvement in the job market, but also historically high inflation. And as he said, that's one of the Federal Reserve's main mandates, is to get that under control. That's the challenge and the opportunity.
Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief with Bankrate. We always appreciate your time and insights. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, John.
How one group is using the transformative power of the church to help bring peace to one of America's most dangerous cities, when Faith Nation returns. Crime and violence have long been associated with the city of Chicago. This week is no exception, and the victims, some of the city's most helpless. In the last few days, 6 teenagers and children were shot in Chicago, one fatally. The 15-year-old boy was killed Tuesday shortly after leaving school. Police are investigating his murder and each of the other shootings. Meanwhile, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot is in Washington, D.C. this week asking for additional federal support to address gun violence in the Windy City. Her trip to Washington comes on the heels of one of the most violent years in Chicago history, 2021 seeing an alarming number of murders. And as Charlene Aaron reports, while police try to stomp out crime, one pastor is taking a unique approach to fight back.
The Chicago Police Department says 797 people were killed in this city last year. That's 25 more than in 2020 and 299 more than 2019. Those hard stats are what's behind one pastor's 100-day campaign to end the cycle of violence by creating safer communities and opportunities for the city's youth.
When you have so many gangs like we have in Chicago who are predators on these young people's and keeping them from living productive lives, you're going to have issues as it relates to violence, as we're seeing.
Pastor Corey Brooks heads Project Hood, a ministry that empowers youth and families. He says the deadly violence in his city is part of a national crisis.
I believe that violence is a lot like cancer as it relates to the fact that if you don't deal with it, it spreads.
Murders in America spiking to the highest rate in 25 years, the closest it's come to the crime wave of the early 90s. Minneapolis had 96 murders last year, one shy of its 1995 record. Los Angeles saw its highest number of homicides in 15 years with 397. And New York reported 488 murders in 2021, the highest since 2011. Back in Chicago, the neighborhood where Brooks's ministry is based was once named the most dangerous block in the city. To change that narrative, Brooks is camping out atop a building in Chicago's South Side in the middle of winter. His goal is to create a community center where kids can learn, play, and thrive.
One, I want to bring awareness to the violence in Chicago so that we can come up with some solutions from around the country. But two, to raise as much money as we possibly can so we can build a center that is focused on just that, solving the issues of violence and poverty, helping to change the trajectory of individuals' lives so that they're not participating in gangs, so that they're not likely to be a shooter or to be shot.
Brian Anderson credits Brooks and his ministry for helping him avoid that path.
It was proof positive of how dynamic God's grace really is on a person, right? So to be able to be as close to Pastor Brooks as I have been for years, even before, I really began to develop my own personal relationship with Christ, so to kind of see him through those eyes.
Alexander, who earned both a political science and law degree, now works with Project Hood, helping lead the next generation.
It's one of the really great things that Project Hood provides is community, and just belonging and just being, and just being in a good environment. I think I just really needed to see someone lead in the way that he leads.
Pastor Brooks believes that the church has the power to change the atmosphere of the city and bring peace to its people.
I really do believe this with all my heart. If all the churches in Chicago would just all out blitz with the gospel, especially with the children and teenagers, we can see things change instantly and in the years to come. I think the church is the hope of the world.
Meanwhile, this pastor is fasting and praying and hoping to leave the roof on February 28th with the funds to build his community center and begin rebuilding lives. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Great reporting. Thank you, Charlene. Coming up, a record-breaking race around the world. Details next when we return. Finally tonight, history made in the world of aviation, with a teenager becoming the youngest woman to fly all the way around the world, all on her own. 19-year-old Zara Rutherford ended her voyage today in Belgium. She set off last summer back in August for the 32,000-mile trip with the goal of breaking the age record. But the 5-month flying adventure, along with a few visa-related delays along the route, actually ended up helping her break 2. The teen is also the first woman to travel the globe in what's called a microlight aircraft. Congratulations to her, and I guess someone you can say is top in flight. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you right back here tomorrow.